Hey there! Welcome to Lingo Dots Podcasts. Today, we're diving into the life of one of the most famous presidents ever, John F. Kennedy, or as many called him, JFK.
Yeah, you've probably heard about how he was assassinated, right? But the thing is, JFK's life was way more than that sad day. He had an incredible life, full of challenges, wins, and even family drama.
Exactly. We'll talk about his family, his youth, his time as a war hero, and his exciting days in politics. Ready to explore the world of JFK? Let's jump in. To really understand JFK, we have to start with his family. The Kennedys were often called American royalty. They were famous, rich, and very powerful. But their story started with a lot of hard work.
Yeah! JFK's grandparents, Patrick Kennedy and Bridget Murphy, came to America from Ireland in the 1800s. Life wasn't easy for them at all. When Patrick died, Bridget was left alone with their son. She had to work as a maid to survive.
Right, but Bridget saved every penny she earned. After a few years, she opened a small general store. Her hard work paid off, and her son, P.J. Kennedy, grew up helping her.
PJ didn't stop with just running a store. When he was older, he opened a pub, made a lot of money, and even bought a bank. Talk about leveling up.
Then came P.J.'s son, Joseph Kennedy Sr., who became JFK's father. He was super determined to prove that Irish Americans could be as successful as anyone else. Back then, there was a lot of discrimination against Irish Catholics, especially from wealthy families.
That's right. Many Americans looked down on the Irish and thought of them as poor or lazy. But Joseph Sr. wanted to change that. He worked really hard, made millions in business, and became a very powerful man.
He even married Rose Fitzgerald, the daughter of the mayor of Boston. Together, they had 9 children. Joseph Sr. wanted his kids to aim high. His dream? That one of them would become President of the United States.
And guess what? At first, he hoped his oldest son, Joe Jr., would be president. But life had other plans. We'll get to that soon. But now, let's see what JFK was like as a kid.
JFK's childhood was far from easy. He was born on May 29, 1917, and his real name was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. But everyone called him Jack. Even as a baby, Jack was often sick.
Yeah, he had everything. Whooping cough, scarlet fever, chicken pox, you name it. On top of that, doctors said he had a serious condition called Addison's disease. They even told his parents he might not live to grow up.
But Jack didn't let that get him down. People who knew him said he was always smiling and making jokes, even when he felt bad. His brothers and sisters joked that if a mosquito bit Jack, the mosquito would drop dead.
His family had to move between the U.S. and England because of his dad's job. But no matter where they were, Jack always had a bit of a wild side. When he was a teenager, he went to a private school called Choate Rosemary Hall in Connecticut.
That's where he created the Muckers Club. It was a group of boys who pulled pranks around campus. They once planned to put horse manure on the dance floor. If YouTube had been around, these guys would have gone viral for sure.
But Jack's older brother, Joe Jr., was the golden boy. He was smart, athletic, and everyone thought he would be president one day. Jack, on the other hand, struggled in school and got average grades, except in English and history.
Jack's easygoing, carefree nature made him different from Joe. He knew life could be short, so he lived every day to the fullest, and that spirit would stick with him throughout his life.
It sure did. And next, we'll see how Jack's fearless attitude made him a hero during World War II.
After finishing high school, Jack went to Harvard University. But even then, life wasn't smooth for him. His father wanted him to study political science, but Jack really loved English literature. He also loved swimming and sailing, and hanging out with girls.
Things got serious when World War II broke out. Jack's older brother, Joe Jr., joined the war as a pilot. Jack wanted to serve too, but his old back injury made the military reject him at first.
Of course, his dad didn't take no for an answer. He pulled some strings, and soon Jack was accepted into the Navy. Even with his bad back, Jack became the commander of a torpedo boat called PT-109 in the South Pacific.
And this is where things got intense. One night, a Japanese ship attacked Jack's boat and split it in half. Jack and his crew were stranded in the water with no help in sight.
Yeah. Jack didn't panic, though. He made sure every crew member was accounted for, even though he was in terrible pain. One of the men, Patrick McMahon, was badly burned and couldn't swim.
Jack swam for 3 hours, towing McMahon by holding a string from his life jacket with his teeth. They finally made it to a small island and waited a whole week before they were rescued.
Jack became a war hero, but when he returned home, he was exhausted and in constant pain. Still, his family celebrated his bravery. But Joe Jr. felt the pressure to do something just as heroic, and that led to tragedy.
Yeah. Joe took on a dangerous mission, and sadly, his plane exploded. His death changed everything for the Kennedys. Now it was Jack's turn to carry the family's hopes and dreams.
And with that, Jack's path toward the presidency began, though it wasn't exactly what he wanted. Let's talk about how that journey took shape. Jack never really planned to be president. Honestly, he wanted to be a writer or sail around the world. But after Joe Jr.'s death, all of their father's dreams were now on Jack's shoulders.
Yeah, his father, Joseph Sr., had spent years building connections and making sure his kids were ready for big things. He pushed Jack into politics, even though Jack wasn't that excited about it.
With his dad's support, Jack ran for Congress and later became a senator. He didn't have much experience at first, but people liked him. He was young, charming, and came across as just a regular guy, even though he was from a wealthy family.
His marriage to Jacqueline Bouvier, or Jackie, also helped his public image. She was smart, stylish, and spoke several languages. She wasn't just a pretty face. She became a key part of his political life, helping him prepare for speeches and events.
The public loved them as a couple. Jackie was often in magazines, and people admired her fashion sense and interior design skills. Meanwhile, Jack had this cool, down-to-earth attitude. He wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves, visit factories, and shake hands with ordinary Americans.
When he ran for president in 1960, he attracted lots of young voters. America was ready for change, and Jack, with his Boston accent and energetic style, seemed like the perfect fit.
Yeah. At just 43 years old, Jack became the youngest elected president in U.S. history. And when he moved into the White House, he brought his younger brother, Bobby, along as Attorney General, even though Bobby was only 35.
Jack's journey to the top was fast, but his time as president wasn't going to be easy. Next, we'll talk about the big challenges he faced and the moments that made him a legend.
Being president was no walk in the park for Jack. One of the biggest challenges he faced was the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, the world came dangerously close to a nuclear war.
Yeah, Cuba, led by Fidel Castro, had gotten nuclear missiles from the Soviet Union. Those missiles were pointed right at the U.S. Can you imagine how scary that must have been?
Jack had to act fast. He set up a naval blockade around Cuba to stop more missiles from arriving. At the same time, he worked hard to avoid war through secret talks with the Soviet Union.
It was a nerve-wracking time. But in the end, Jack's strategy worked, and the missiles were removed. Many people say he saved the world from nuclear disaster that day.
And let's not forget the space race. Jack pushed America to dream big. He wanted the U.S. to be the first country to send people to the moon. That idea inspired so many people back then.
But not everything was perfect. Jack didn't want the U.S. to get involved in the Vietnam War, even though some people thought he was being too soft on communism. Sadly, after his death, his plans to avoid the war didn't happen, and things got worse.
Still, Jack tried his best to lead with hope and courage. And even with all the pressure, he loved being with his family. He would spend mornings watching cartoons with his kids in the White House.
Behind the scenes, Jackie was his biggest supporter, helping him with speeches and translating documents. Jack was more than a president. He was a man who truly cared about the people around him.
But just when it seemed like Jack had so much ahead of him, tragedy struck. On November 22nd, 1963, everything changed. Jack and Jackie were riding through the streets of Dallas, Texas, in a fancy car, a Lincoln Continental. Crowds were cheering, and Jack was waving to everyone.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a happy day. Jack and the Texas governor, John Connally, were in the same car with their wives. But as they drove past a building called the Texas School Book Depository, shots rang out.
The first bullet hit Jack in the neck. Then, another shot hit his head. He collapsed in Jackie's arms. Governor Connally was hit too, but he survived. Jack wasn't so lucky. He was pronounced dead not long after.
It was heartbreaking. The whole country was in shock. Everyone remembers exactly where they were when they heard the news. Jack was gone, just like that.
A man named Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for the crime. But before he could even explain himself, he was killed by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby on live TV. That only made people more suspicious.
There are so many theories about what really happened that day. Some believe Oswald acted alone, while others think there was a bigger conspiracy. But the truth, we may never know.
What we do know is that Jack's death left a huge hole in the hearts of Americans. He was more than just a president. He was a symbol of hope.
Let's wrap things up by talking about how Jack Kennedy's legacy still lives on today.
JFK's life may have been cut short, but his legacy is still alive. People remember him for his bravery, his charm, and his dream to make the world a better place.
Yeah, he taught us to dream big, like sending a man to the moon. And even though his time in office was short, he left a mark that won't be forgotten.
He lived every day like it could be his last. And maybe that's the biggest lesson we can take from his life. Make the most of every moment.
Thanks for tuning in to Lingo Dots Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss out on more great stories like this one.
Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.